Let me refresh this, and it should be a live stream now. What's that?
There's live on my end.
Okay, good. All right. Well, let me get back over here because I have to open another window. Yep, here we go. It's live now. Let me open this window so that I can have the chat room going. And hey, Nick, how are you, man? You're first one in. That was quick. Nick, did you get a notification that we had gone live? I assume. Hey, God Cotty, how are you, man? What's up, Tyler? Stalking Horse, you guys are on the ball. John Pateley, Matthew Turner, Henry, Lindman. Okay, good, Nicholas. I was just wondering, we're testing this out one final time before. This is extremely informal tonight, guys, just so y'all know. We're testing this stream out one final time before we go live tomorrow night using Google Hangouts. I've actually got Josh Barnhill with me. He's an attorney right now, a friend of mine from not too far from where I'm staying at right now. And he's going to be our main guest on tomorrow night. So, again, we're just doing some informal testing right now. Josh, how's your audio on your end?
Sounds great on my end.
Okay. And it's swapping tonight. The other night, whenever I had the other gentleman on that was helping me test, it wasn't swapping. It's like whenever it goes to your mic now, it immediately swaps over automatically, so I don't have to change the video screen.
All right.
Let's see. Let me get back over here so I can see the chat window. Guys, real quick, can y'all hear Josh okay? I know my audio hasn't changed since the other night. I just want to see, can y'all hear Josh okay? Josh, maybe just kind of introduce yourself so we can hear the audio on your side.
Yeah, my name is Josh Barnhill. As Paul said, I'm an attorney down in Lafayette, Louisiana, but I also work for a firearms manufacturer down here. So that's how I've met Paul and acquired all this firearms law information that we're going to talk about, I guess, some tonight and tomorrow.
Okay. How about that, guys? I'm looking at y'all's feedback. It looks like the audio is good. So that's great. That's a load off of me not having to worry about that. Let's see. Josh, let's talk a little bit. We spoke informally. Again, this is just a matter to make sure everything is stable. We'll probably talk about more about these topics tomorrow night. And again, guys, I apologize for the very informal setting. I'm sitting in my living room, which is attached to my kitchen. I'm actually waiting on food to be delivered. So I may have to bug out over here in a second. But Josh and I were talking earlier. Josh brought to my attention there's a bunch of House and Senate bills that are being proposed in our state, in Louisiana right now. And Josh and I had talked earlier about one in particular that seemed to be kind of fast tracking its way through. Josh, if you could kind of kick off a little bit about that discussion. Again, we may go more in depth tomorrow, but let's talk a little bit about what you and I were discussing earlier.
Yeah, this is a Senate bill, proposed bill 231. And it adds, I guess, a new violation to a protective order. Basically, if you're in possession of a firearm, carrying concealed firearm, or attempt to purchase a firearm, then you were violating a protective order against you. Now, what really concerned me about this bill is that they add a mandatory reporting section for dealers. So for FFLs, if somebody comes in, if this bill were to pass, somebody comes into your shop or an FFL and they get a denial on a NICS check, the FFL would then be required within 24 hours to report this denial to the sheriff for any denial, no reason. And then the sheriff in 24 hours would have to check to see if this person had an outstanding, had a protective order against them, restraining orders type thing. So, and what's really scary is that if the FFL is found to not have reported, and I guess not have reported within 24 hours, the penalty, it says, see, the penalty here shall, for not less than 5 or more than 20 years at hard labor, and then a penalty, and then a fine of $1,000, no less than $1,000, no more than $5,000, or imprisonment. So you, as an FFL, if you don't report, you're looking at possibly being, you get a monetary fine or spending some time up in Angola at hard labor.
Josh, one quick question. You mentioned that for reporting purposes, if you get denied. Now, just so I understand everything correctly, is this regardless of what that person's past is? Because obviously you don't know that. You don't know what any of their history is. Is this any denial? Like if this were to pass, is this any denial in the state of Louisiana that the FFL dealer has to report that to see if that person has anything pending against them? Is that what you're saying, that every single denial has to go through this process from the FFL dealer?
The specific language in the law says if a person is reported ineligible, so that would have to be a denial, ineligible to purchase a firearm by the NICS system, and a licensed dealer shall report to the sheriff. So yeah, any denial, because you don't know the reason, and as we know, most denials are a false denial, but that doesn't matter. The dealer's responsibility is to report to the sheriff within 24 hours, and then it's the sheriff's responsibility from there to figure out whether or not this person has a restraining order, protective order against them.
Now, just out of curiosity, obviously money drives everything. I know some of these bills actually do state how it's going to be funded. Does this bill actually suggest how the sheriff's department in each parish in Louisiana would actually pay for this? Because obviously, with 95% of your denials in the NICS system being incorrect, it's going to be a huge load. Somebody is going to have to be able to staff up to be able to handle this load in each individual parish. If the sheriff in each parish, and guys, we have parishes here in Louisiana, you guys have counties, but if each individual parish of that parish sheriff is responsible for fact checking this to make sure that this person is either okay to pass this NICS check or deny it, well, clearly their receptionist at the front desk who's there now is not going to be equipped to handle this workload. So does it actually spell out if this is going to be funded somehow, or somebody's just going to have to suck up this cost on their own?
All it says is what the dealers require, what information the dealer is required to report, but it says it's to be reported within 24 hours in a format prescribed by the sheriff, and then that's it. Same thing with like when 41F went into effect. It didn't say how the sheriff was to be notified. It just said he had to be notified. So down here, I worked with the sheriff about what we came up with. He just came up with a new email address, and then all notifications are just emailed to a specific email address. And so I'm not seeing anything in the bill that it basically says it's just up to the sheriff to figure out how to do it.
I don't understand how something like this could be fast tracked. The reason why is because unless it's put on hold to figure out what the nuts and bolts of it need to be, because there's not enough explanation in the actual proposal itself to even talk about how it's going to happen. I mean, I can promise you that sheriffs, probably 100% of them in the state right now, if this thing got passed and they were called, notified that they had to do this, they would be like, what? They don't know anything about this. And this is not something that I can see this, like your normal NICS check is what, 3 days. And then if you haven't been notified after your 3-day wait, then you have to actually you have to give that person the gun, which is kind of weird that if nobody's gotten back with you, then you're eligible instead of just the opposite of that. But it would seem like that could possibly either prolong it, or the weird thing is if a sheriff hasn't had a chance to get back with that NICS check by then, that 3-day period, that once it's gone, if the person has been notified, then they're approved to get the letter, or excuse me, they're approved to buy the gun, then isn't this process all for nothing? Because if the sheriff hasn't gotten back within 3 days and then the person's being allowed to get the gun, what if they find something a day after? I mean, I know you don't know the answers to this. It's kind of rhetorical questions, but don't you see this being an issue?
I mean, to me, it would be so within 3 days, if you don't get a proceed or denial, then or if you don't get a denial, you can proceed within 3 days or after 3 days. So I would say that, that wouldn't be ineligible. So there'd be no reporting requirement to the sheriff at that point. I mean, to me, I would say if they're ineligible, the only way they're ineligible is that there's just a flat denial, to a NICS, a NICS check. But I mean, the sheriff, he kind of has a lot to do because, so you have to notify the sheriff, and then the sheriff within 24 hours not only has to search the Louisiana database, but it says, or any other databases that may be out there, because, and they have to, if they do find a protective order, they have to contact the person who is, the person, I guess, who sought the protective order, to let them know that the person that they issued the protective order against has attempted to purchase a firearm. And then there's one last thing in this section, one more thing that the sheriff's required to do, and it says, if any time a law enforcement or just any law enforcement agency discovers that a licensed dealer knew or should have known that the purchaser or attempted purchaser had a protective order issued against him, the law enforcement agency has to notify all state and federal licensing agencies of the licensed dealer's failure to report. So what that tells me is, even if like a prosecutor in his discretion decides not to enforce, in his, let's say you have a DA, let's say the Lafayette DA decides, well, this is kind of silly, okay, so this person didn't report a NICS within 24 hours. Well, I'm not gonna file charges against them. It's my discretion not to do that. I think that's pretty onerous. No harm, there was no protective order against this person. So, but this law still tries to get around. So if the prosecutor decides not to prosecute a dealer, the sheriff or law enforcement is still basically required to rat out the dealer to the ATF to say, hey, they violated the law. So you need to look into them. You need to come investigate them. Maybe even revoke their license, because they violated the law, even though the DA may have decided not to prosecute.
The unfortunate thing I see with laws like this that are really not enforceable, so they don't get enforced, but they go on the books, is that at any given time, everybody kind of lets their guard down. Then suddenly somebody gets in a pinch, and that's the technicality that they have on them in the legal system, that, oh, well, you did break this law. You know what I mean? I mean, I see this as happening, that's something somebody is going to ignore, because if this does pass, sheriffs are not going to enforce this. I know the sheriff in our parish over here, he doesn't have the time to enforce this. We're one of the biggest parishes over here. This man's hands are full. If he's not going to be given any federal funding or state funding to back this up, he can't do this. Not that he doesn't want to do it, but he can't enforce this. So then the law stays on the books, and then one of us gets pulled over. Let's say, you get pulled over in a parish where the DA doesn't like you. Maybe you tried a case or something like that, and he's got it out for you. Well, all of a sudden he's got this one thing, and I know you're not an FFL, but say applying it to an FFL, somebody can actually have this thing, law sitting out on the books that's hardly ever enforced, and then all of a sudden it gets enforced on somebody whenever they're in a bind. These are the scary kind of laws that bother me, because they kind of sit out there and they lurk until it's time to actually nail somebody, and they catch somebody, and it's something we should never let get past in the first place.
Oh yeah, it's definitely onerous to unnecessarily onerous to FFLs. I mean, I see a little bit of myself, but dealing with dealers around the area, I mean, they're busy enough keeping up with the regulations that are already there, and to add an additional regulation. If it's a big store, I don't know how many denials they may get in a day, but it's just one more piece of compliance that they need to put in that costs them time and money for something that's ridiculous. Because if they were denied, the person was denied. He didn't get the gun.
Right.
Why is it on the dealer, to figure out whether or not this person has a restraining order? To protect somebody who may not need protecting, because NICS did its job, or didn't do its job most likely. I guess we're on a pause for call to get his food.
Sorry, guys. Had to grab my food.
So what'd you order?
I ordered a Philly cheesesteak and some broccoli and cheese soup, if anybody wants to know. Figure that'll go good with a couple of cold beers.
Sounds pretty good. No, I mean, but what I was saying is just, Nick's, the Nick's system is there supposedly to, weed out people who aren't supposed to have firearms. So if they get it delayed, you can argue, well, the Nick's did what it was supposed to do, even though most likely the denial was, a fraudulent denial. But, from a dealer, I'm saying he was denied. I didn't give him a gun. What more do you want from me? So I have to tell the sheriff now? It's ridiculous.
That is.
So the sheriff will go, supposedly, or so law enforcement can harass this person when most likely it was a false denial.
Well, I want to get real quick. Let's see. This is kind of like, I guess, guys, it's a very informal test for us to test this system, but also we wanted to open it up to you guys for tomorrow night. Josh, you still okay to come on with us tomorrow night?
Yeah, I should be able to. One last thing on this bill. It has actually been scheduled. It was supposed to be voted on the floor of the Senate today, but it was pushed back to Monday. So if anybody listening if they're Louisiana residents, contact your senators and let them know, that you oppose this bill, especially if you're in FFL. This is not a good bill for firearm dealers, manufacturers, gunsmiths, all that kind of stuff.
This is definitely a bill that will catch FFL dealers off balance here. They're not going to be expecting this. Most of the gun store guys that I know, the local gun shops, and obviously this is going to apply to the big box stores too now. That's the crazy thing. You're going to have your academies and the Bass Pro Shop and all that. This is going to apply to them as well. But the smaller guys, they keep usually up with gun news, but most legislation is just so much meat and potatoes that they don't pay attention to it. And I feel like this would catch somebody by big time surprise, unfortunately.
I think that there's something like 15 or so pieces of firearm legislation that were submitted this session, 10 of which are negative. And the gun shops I went to and talked to them, they had no clue that any of it had been introduced. I mean, they're just, they're busy, they're working, they're not paying attention. So, I mean, I try to, send them all, these legislative updates I get, just let them know that, talk to your senators, your Congress, your representatives, and push it, because I talk to the members and I talk to people like, oh, this is Louisiana. I talked to a guy on the committee in the House who's going to hear all the House gun bills, and he's like, because I asked him, I was like, well, what are the chances of these things passing? He goes, oh, this is Louisiana, none of these are going to pass. But if everybody thinks that, and nobody says anything, and nobody calls their congressman because they think, oh no, this is not going to pass. I mean, you got to stay on them. Send them emails as often as possible, call them, and as much as you can. Because if you leave them alone to do what they want, they'll usually we end up getting the raw end of that deal.
Yeah. Well, guys, do me a favor. Those of you that are watching, again, tomorrow night we're going to do our normal live stream at 7 p.m. Central Standard Time, just like we typically do on a Friday night. Obviously we've moved our time for the last month, I believe, to 7 p.m. Central Standard Time, and Josh is going to be on with us again. If you have any legal questions in terms of guns, obviously Josh is not being your legal counsel by being on here, so he can't be held responsible for any offhand advice that he might give you or comments that he makes. But at the same time, he's a good resource to bounce things off of. So if you guys have any questions, he also does work, interacts, and liaison with the ATF. So if you guys have any questions for tomorrow night, jot those down and hold on to them. And tomorrow night we'll go over all your questions. What I'll do is, as Josh is going through discussing in detail some of the questions, I'll peruse through the comments and try to pluck your questions out so that I can give them to Josh and we can kind of cover those. So we'll do that tomorrow night again, 7 p.m. Central Standard Time. We'll do that, and hopefully you guys have a chance to hang out with us tomorrow night. We should have a pretty good, interesting, and enlightening show tomorrow night. So, again, if you guys can hang out with us tomorrow night, same place, Josh, thanks for hanging out with me tonight to be able to at least test this system to make sure that I could get you on here with no problems, and everything seems to be good. So I'm looking forward to tomorrow night.
All right. Thanks, Paul. Thanks, guys.
All right. We'll see everybody tomorrow night.